After she escaped Buzzo's grasp, Brad chases after Buddy, coming to a rocky shoreline where he finds a man that looks incredibly similar to Tardy, the truck driver he saved earlier, looking through a telescope across the sea. The man introduces himself as Tardy and tells Brad Buddy stole his boat and sailed to an island in the distance. He tells Brad he can make a new boat to take him to Buddy if Brad collects all the necessary components: wood, a sail, something to propel it, and the tools to put it all together. As Brad sets out, he hears the familiar tune of a trumpet sounding out through the area. He finds the trumpet man again, this time playing his instrument in the valley of the area as opposed to the mountaintop. He again stops playing, upset he's been interrupted, so Brad again leaves him alone to play his tune. While searching for the equipment, Brad encounters Columbo, who realizes that Brad being alive must mean the gents are dead. But he doesn't mourn them long, supposing they got what was coming to them. Columbo grows nostalgic and asks Brad for one last go, just like they used to do as kids. He tells Brad there's a boat nearby. They'll race to it, and the winner gets to keep it and use it to get to Buddy. Brad hops onto a nearby motorcycle, and with the sunset beaming behind them, the two race to the boat. One with the utter desperation to reach the one he loves, the other with the desire to recapture the thrill of his youth. No matter the outcome, when the duo reach the end of the track, there is no boat, and Columbo admits he lied to Brad. Columbo then grows uncharacteristically sentimental, admitting he always picked on Brad because he was envious of him. He thanks him for the race, as it showed him what he needed to know. He pulls a gun, pointing it at Brad, and with fondness in his voice, he reflects on the fun times they had and says he'll miss him. He then turns the gun on Spaghetti and fires, killing his loyal steed. Columbo apologizes to Brad, turns the gun on himself, and then wishes him goodbye as the gunshot echoes through the area. Columbo calls after the gents, then slumps over, dead. As Brad looks over the body of his childhood bully, he begins to understand him a bit. Columbo had always felt inferior to Brad in some way, and unable to accept that, he resorted to tormenting Brad in order to make himself feel better. In these final moments, he realized he would never be able to get over his envy of Brad, and instead of continuing an endless cycle of agony between the two of them, he ended it by killing the one whom he believed was the worst between the two. The emotion of the moment isn't lost on Brad, but concerned with the whereabouts of Buddy, he returns to his path towards building a boat. He finds the wood he needs by chopping down the last Blood Moon tree after killing its remaining guardians, and finds cloth for a sail after beating either an extremely vain man named Hollywood Hawk or his mutated form. Brad defeats a warlord named Han Tsunami in his bathhouse to find a fan to propel the boat with, and now only needs the tools to put everything together. His search leads him to a tall, snow-covered mountain where he's dodging suicide bombers and fighting snowmen. He takes refuge from the dangers of the mountain in a small cave, but finds he's not alone in here. There's a young boy crouched nearby, and as Brad approaches, he finds the boy's face is wrapped in bloody bandages. When he talks to him, the boy, with a stutter, apologizes to his master that he didn't mean to make him mad, and then vanishes. It was another of Brad's hallucinations. Brad climbs further up the mountain, where he beats another warlord named Buff Van Dyke in combat, prompting the man to join Brad, bringing his toolbox along with him. Brad heads back to Tardy, but if Sticky was spared earlier in the game, Brad will come face to face with his former friend. Brad will order him to step aside, but apologetically resolute, Sticky will tell him he won't let him destroy the world, and a fight erupts. Sticky attempts to gun Brad down, but the help of Brad's new companions is too much for Sticky, and he eventually succumbs to their combined defense. He tries to appeal to Brad one final time, but Brad merely watches the life drain from him, and then continues on his journey to reclaim his daughter. Brad brings the boat components to Tardy, and together they begin constructing the craft. Brad, seemingly unconcerned with the health of his men, has them rest while he and Tardy work long into the night, barely speaking to each other. When the boat is finished and it's time to set sail, Brad convinces Tardy to set sail with only the two of them going, abandoning his party there on the rocky shore as he and Tardy sail to the island Buddy escaped to. When they arrive, Tardy expresses excitement over finding Buddy and getting some action, but Brad tells him that's not going to happen. Tardy, expecting more of a reward than a pat on the back, starts a fight, but is no match for Brad's might. Getting a chance to explore, Brad finds the island is not very large, yet doesn't seem uninhabited, as it is absolutely covered in empty alcohol bottles, implying the person who lives here frequently partakes in the intoxicating beverage. There's a cave on the island, and when Brad enters, he finds Buddy, and sitting close by is an old man, bald and gray, wearing a red shirt and black sunglasses. It's Brad's father, Marty Armstrong, the man that abused and molested his daughter Lisa until it led to her to commit suicide. And now, he's here, all alone on this deserted island, with Buddy. He asks Buddy about the little blue pills by her, and she tells him it's called Joy. She says it doesn't taste good, but that they make you feel good. Calling her sweetheart, Marty says she shouldn't take those, and that's when Buddy notices Brad. Marty turns to ask who's there, but stops mid-sentence in disbelief. Brad likewise expresses his disbelief. There's a moment of silent contemplation between the two. Then flashes of red fury flare up in Brad, and he charges a fireball to destroy Marty where he sits. But Buddy throws herself between them and begs Brad to stop, to spare Marty because he saved her life. Brad orders her to move, and when she doesn't, he kicks her out of the way so he can act on his fury. Seeing Brad strike Buddy upsets Marty, and he comes to her aid, starting a fight between father and son. As the battle rages, Brad begins to gain the upper hand, and Marty begins to wear the wounds of their fight. Buddy again jumps between them, attempting to protect Marty from Brad, but Brad's wrath can't be quelled, and he continues the battle, forcefully knocking Buddy out of the way and beating his father into a bloody pulp. Defeated, Marty tries to appeal to his son, saying he's changed, but Brad isn't in the mood for mercy. With his dying breath, Marty calls to Lisa, saying he's sorry. A flash of red fills the room as Brad gets catharsis for the abuse he suffered in the past at his father's hands and the torment he's felt from it in all the years since. The emotional release caused Brad to black out, and when he wakes up, he finds he's stranded on the island. Buddy, who was knocked out during the fight between Brad and Marty, has fled the island using the very boat that Brad arrived in. Not intending to be left behind, Brad drifts away from his father's tomb by using Tardy's body as a flotation device. At the mercy of the ocean's currents, Brad arrives on shores adorned with red skulls, the symbol of the Rando army. He passes through the unwelcoming environment until coming upon a sight he's been terrified of seeing ever since he set out from home. Buddy has been overpowered by a man who's holding her down while mutilating her, and she is helpless to stop him. As Brad approaches, he finds the man as Mr. Anganelli, Sticky's father, who instantly recognizes Brad and expounds to him about how his fate has changed in this new world, how he's the one that gets the girl now. Brad warns Mr. Anganelli not to touch Buddy, which turns his attention to her, and he scratches her face, saying he needs to brand her so that everyone else will know she belongs to him. This is too much for Brad, and he charges forward and kills Mr. Anganelli where he stands. Mr. Anganelli lets out a crazy cackle while relishing the mark he left on Buddy and on history. After his laugh dies away, Brad approaches Buddy and gives her his poncho so she can cover up, but Buddy refuses it. Brad remarks at her injuries and asks if she's okay. Buddy says that she's fine, but that she doesn't want Brad's help, and asks why he can't just leave her alone. Brad tries to defend himself, saying he's trying to help her, which prompts Buddy to explain that he's done nothing but hurt her and take everything away from her. She tells him he's a monster, and what she saw him do to Marty is proof. Brad begins to explain to Buddy that she didn't know how horrendous Marty was, that she didn't truly know the man. But Buddy interrupts, screaming she knows Marty was a better father to her in a few days than Brad ever was. She storms off, leaving Brad alone, and a strange feeling begins to well up inside of him. Brad saw his father as a monster, one that had no love or compassion, and only inflicted pain and suffering to those around him. So to hear from Buddy that he is worse than the most terrible person he knows makes him realize he's an utter failure. And yet, even after hearing all he does is bring pain and misery to Buddy, something compels him to go on, and he follows after her, still grasping onto an unexplainably intense desire to protect her. He eventually finds Buddy standing at the head of a large host of Rando's soldiers. He implores her to escape with him and begins to flee, but Buddy charges through the men instead. Brad turns to go after her when someone orders him to stop. Brad turns to see his party has come, but they're not there to help him. They've come to stop him. As Brad's former companions confront him, some reveal contempt for him, while others reveal that they've gone along with him only because they wanted exactly what Brad believes most men want from Buddy. Others feel a need to stop him for the greater good, for the benefit of the entire world, and some lament the need to kill someone they've grown to call friend. However, the desire to protect Buddy that's welled up within Brad won't be extinguished, and thus, in an emotional battle marked with reluctance, obligation, anger, and grief, Brad kills what's left of his former friends. Now standing alone without anyone on his side, he turns to face Rando's army. At its end, Buddy has reached Rando, who sees Buddy's mutilated face. Through a stutter, he attempts to comfort Buddy, telling her a face is nothing, that what's inside her is what counts. And he knows that inside, she's strong. Rando's soft stutter comes as a shock to most of his men who have never heard him speak before, but they return their attention to Brad. They give him a chance to walk away with his life, but Brad refuses. He tells the men he's been dead for 35 years, and today marks the day he lives. He then single-handedly tears through the entirety of the army completely on his own. The battle leaves him heavily injured. He's covered in blood, with weapons protruding from him in many places, and he can barely walk. But still, he goes on and approaches Buddy and Rando. Telling Buddy to get back, Rando confronts Brad. Calling him Master Armstrong, he tries one last time to appeal to him, to get him to stand down, to realize Buddy is the future, and without her, the human race is doomed. But Brad rejects that notion, telling Rando she's just a kid. Regretfully, Rando sheds his robe, and a battle between the two begins. Their fighting styles are remarkably similar. Rando unleashes combos of buster punches upon Brad, while the two trade dueling fireballs. However, the bottles of diesel firebombs Brad lobs at Rando gives him an advantage, and he gains the upper hand in the fight. The fighting is so fierce that Rando's mask eventually breaks, revealing a scarred and broken man. He begins to cry, yet the fight continues until Rando can't go on. He marvels at Brad's fighting ability, and then strangely, thanks him for everything. He slumps over defeated, and Brad finds Buddy fled in the chaos of the fighting. He begins to go on to find her, yet something compels him to look back. Seeing the pile of unrecognizable mush he's left in his wake, he has a moment of silent contemplation. He thinks back to all he's done in his desire to protect Buddy, held her below a small mud hut, restricted her from leaving, imprisoning her, and when she was taken from him, he murdered countless men, some of whom he used to call friend, just to return her to that small room below the hut. Did he really do it from a place of love and a desire to protect her? Or is he really just a selfish monster, like Buddy called him earlier? Does he really care for Buddy? Or is she merely a way Brad intends to redeem himself for the death of his little sister Lisa? A way for him to get over the pent-up guilt he feels for her suicide. These questions swirl in his foggy mind, and that's when he notices a familiar face. The man in the polka-dotted poncho is watching him, his horn lying on the ground close by. The deeply intense desire to protect Buddy returns, so Brad struggles onward, determined to find Buddy. He finds her sobbing on her own, and calls to her, telling her it's over. In a fury, Buddy runs up to him and asks him why he's doing this to her, why he's trying to do this now instead of when she needed him. Brad pleads her to stop, but she continues screaming that he's taken away the chance she had at a life, that he makes her sick, and that she hates him. Commandingly, Brad screams, "Stop!" He tells her he knows how she feels about him. It's likely not dissimilar to how he felt about his own father. She tries to understand why he's done what he's done, why he took away her chance to choose something on her own. So Brad begins to explain that the men wanted to use Buddy to fulfill their own desires, and that she needs to choose her own path. But Buddy doesn't want to hear a lecture. Not now. It's too late for him to be a father. So Brad reveals his innermost desire to Buddy. He wanted to do something good for once, and that was to protect her from anybody. Buddy reveals Brad's greatest failure in his self-appointed task. He's the one that hurt her the most. He couldn't protect her from himself. Realizing his failure brings Brad to tears. He asks Buddy if she can do something for him. He asks her to hold him. Just once. Just so that he can see what it's like. He gets on his knees and begs her for this. Depending on the choice of the player, Buddy either refuses, compelling Brad to cry as he wallows in his unreciprocated love, or cuddles up to the man she calls father, the emotion of the embrace bringing tears to Brad's eyes. He asks Buddy one last thing. He asks her if he did the right thing, then dies at the feet of his daughter. The credits roll, signifying the end of the game, yet strange, violent thoughts flash throughout them. Suddenly, we're returned to Brad, and he has transformed into a disfigured mutant. He crawls forward, entering a small hut where you find a young girl with bandages on her face, sleeping in a brown poncho with joy pills lying close by. He lets out a guttural utterance of the only thing remaining of the mind that was there before, and crawls towards his victim. After a cut to black, a conversation between two researchers working on the joy experiments of the nice neighborhood is heard in the darkness. The first gives more background as to why the drug failed. After it's taken, its users begin to lose control, and they can no longer make decisions for themselves. They only pursue their innermost desires. This explains why Brad was so adamant about protecting Buddy. He wasn't in control of his own actions anymore. The joy he had taken for years was compelling him to act on what he wanted to do most, to protect Buddy from anything, at any cost. The drug's effect was so powerful, nothing could have stopped Brad's pursuit. Not even Buddy herself. The researcher then mentions the only benefit of joy is that it doesn't take a lot to begin the transformation. They begin to lament the failure of joy when they are interrupted by the second voice, who says they've known all of that all along, and now that they've got the money, they will start to build their world. This voice is revealed to be none other than Dr. Yado, the man that created joy. The researcher tries to get him to give up his experiments, prompting Yado to tell him to leave if he feels everything is a failure. However, the man stays, indicating a partnership between the two. And Yado reveals he has a plan. He'll use Nancy. The researcher is shocked by Yado's willingness to use his own daughter to further his own desires, and doesn't believe it'll work. But Yado, naming the first voice Bernard, tells him that once he tastes power like he has, he'll understand. Bernard tells Yato for the last time that his name isn't Bernard, it's Buzzo. There's suddenly one final flashback. Brad, in his gi, walks to his martial arts school. When he enters, he finds blood on the floor, the windows smashed, and the young boy from his earlier flashback crouched in the corner, with his face mutilated beyond recognition. He asks the boy, Dusty, what happened? But Dusty can only apologize to his master for not being strong enough to fight back. Brad asks who is behind the attack, and Dusty says it was him again. Brad seems to recognize that, and Dusty goes on about how crazy he is, how he used a saw to... Dusty heard him say something. This is for Lisa. Dusty tries to get answers from his master about why this happened, about who Lisa is, but Brad walks out, leaving him in his bloody mess. Alone, Dusty mumbles to Brad one more time, ending the game with one last apology to his father. And thus ends Lisa the Painful, a story of unhappiness, unrequited love, abuse, and pain. However, there are still some unexplained mysteries. The consumption of joy begins a transformation that turns people into mutated monsters. So how does that help Dr. Yato's plan to build his world? And what does that world look like? There's also the matter of Buzzo. Where does he fit into Dr. Yato's plans? Is he a subordinate or a partner? And what's with his obsession over Brad and his delight in tormenting him? There is a connection between the two, and it seems to lie in their past. So what exactly is it? There are clues to these answers scattered throughout the story, but the full answers lie in the DLC sequel to this game called Lisa the Joyful, which details the events in the aftermath of Lisa the Painful. But as for this game, it's all over. Again, I would heavily recommend you actually play the game yourself, as the full tone of the game just can't be replicated in video format, and there are a few side areas that I didn't get to talk about that are really awesome in their own right. Hopefully you enjoyed the video nonetheless though, and I was able to do the game justice. If you have any questions or comments or anything like that, feel free to share. I'd be happy to hear from you. But that's it, so thank you for watching and see you later.